Hello everyone, I'm Captain Logan, and today I'm going to tell you how I felt about Better Call Saul. Yeah, the entire 6-season run. I finally finished it a few days ago, and I've been wanting to sit down and do a review of this for the last few days, and I don't know, I got a little bit of cold feet because this is kind of a daunting thing to review, and I'm just going to do a very overview, sign flip kind of review for this. Right now, there's a part of me that would love to sit down and do a real long, complex analysis for this, and I'm just not prepared for that. I feel like I would need to give it another viewing and write a lot of notes and probably watch Breaking Bad again, and I'm sure those video essays are out there too. There's probably a lot of folks that have written really interesting comparison contrast kinds of videos comparing, especially Walter White with Saul Goodman, with Bob Odenkirk's character and Jimmy McGill, and just looking at the franchise as a whole, one story, from beginning to end, beginning with Better Call Saul to the end of Breaking Bad and a little beyond at the end of this. Is it one story? Is it two separate stories that all kind of converge in one place? There's a lot of fascinating stuff to talk about with this show, and I'll get into some of it. But primarily, I just wanted to give you my broad thoughts, tell you my best thing, worst thing, a real standard kind of how we felt about video, but I'll take my time a little bit. If folks have questions and elements that they want me to mention that I might not otherwise talk about. So first of all, let me just talk a little bit about my history with the show and with Breaking Bad. I am at a place where Breaking Bad is my favorite show, bar none, on television. I think I've been through the whole series 4, if not 5 times now. The last time I watched it was with Brandon a few years ago, or a couple years ago. I finally sat down and showed him that show, and he adored it. He will not stop dressing up as Walter White for Halloween yearly now, and I went with my buddy Adam to the theater to see El Camino when that came out. It dropped on Netflix, but we got to see it in the theater at the same time, which was wonderful. And so I'm very familiar with this universe. I adore that show as a character study, seeing the kind of de-evolution of a man's morality, the kind of making of a supervillain. It's kind of in some ways, the best supervillain origin story of all time. One of the things I've always loved about Breaking Bad is that it feels like a genre thing, but it's not a genre thing. Like, there's a reason, I think, that a lot of comic fans and sci-fi fans love that show and kind of eat it up like that, because it has a similar attention to detail and continuity and mythology as something like a Star Trek or a Lord of the Rings, some kind of big science fiction or fantasy thing. And it feels that epic in scope, that grand, even though it's just Albuquerque, with, again, all the attention to detail and how careful it is keeping everything straight, and just the passion that the storytellers clearly have for making that world come alive and feel real. And it more or less, is supposed to be our real world, kind of, but it also feels heightened in its way. It's also got this very noirish sensibility about it. And Better Call Saul is a different beast, but also exactly the same beast. It's so interesting, right? That show starts as let's go back to this universe, but because we're focusing on Saul Goodman, it's gonna be more of a focus on the comedy, which lasted like an episode. It very quickly becomes Breaking Bad, but from a different lens, which if you told me that's what was going to happen with that show, I would have said, yeah, that's a bad idea. It really needs to be a different thing. And I think a lot of fans felt like as soon as you could tell that show is going to actually be more Breaking Bad, but with a different protagonist, it's exactly what that show needed to be, and it's a perplexing thing. It's like, why exactly does that work? You wouldn't really want more of the same, you wouldn't think, because what is the point of a prequel at the end of the day if there's not a really good story to tell apart from what you already know about, apart from just how did this mess begin, which is what so many prequels do. And this thing, I'll say right away, does not have the kind of prequelitis that the Star Wars prequels and Star Trek Enterprise, Discovery, etc., so many different things have, because it didn't approach it as a gimmick. It really is a character study. But at the same time, it also is about fleshing out the background of this world, adding to the mythology, showing us where a lot of things came from. And a lot of it is information that I don't need in Breaking Bad, or I don't think I need, that I do find myself interested in and fascinated with in this show. There are elements here and there that I feel like are a little bit belabored, maybe, and some things that do come off a little bit too much like, well, didn't you always wonder where this came from? It's like, no, not really. Like, I don't know that I needed an origin for the reason that Saul Goodman uses so many different cell phones, for instance. But then it does make a lot of sense. When we have that, it's very clever. It's really smart storytelling. And I don't know that I needed an origin for the big blow-up Statue of Liberty that's outside of his office in Breaking Bad. But then it's not just an origin for that. Those things also speak to the evolution of his character and how he's kind of changing, or is he changing at all? That's kind of the big question with this show. And so I'm skeptical right out the gate when I first watched this show, because I'm not sure why we're here. I'm not. From a Breaking Bad perspective, I just already knowing what comes later, I'm immediately skeptical of prequels. I'm immediately going, I don't want a show that's just here to say, here's where all this stuff came from, fill in the blanks, and because we don't want to move forward, but we want to keep making money from this franchise. And there are places where I found myself worried that that's what we were doing. Like, do we really need an origin for the meth lab underneath the laundry that Gus Fring has? And by the way, I will spoil things through this. I'm going to assume that most people, since the series has been over for a while, that are coming in to see this review will know about this. So I'm not calling this a spoiler cast. It is going to be how we felt about, but I'm not going to be super careful about spoilers. Maybe after the sign flip, I'll do the bigger spoilers, but more minor stuff, like the show does cover the laundry and why there's, and I'm just going to assume that you've seen Breaking Bad if you're watching this video, by the way. Well, and I say that, I also want to speak a little bit to whether or not this stands by itself without Breaking Bad, or if it makes sense to watch them in chronological order as opposed to produced order. See, I will talk about that. Spoilers are complicated for this, so anyway, I'll be careful until my sign flip, but I'll just say, I would, again, raising an eyebrow at some of that stuff where I'm like, I don't know that I really need to know how Gus Fring was able to put the meth lab underneath. But then all these things speak to larger character arcs and give you a broader perspective of these characters, particularly Saul Goodman. Of course, it's his show. Particularly, although interestingly, it is also an ensemble show, and I think it actually pulls that off. I don't think it has to be a singular protagonist show overall, just because Saul Goodman's name is in the title, in the same way that Breaking Bad isn't exactly, because, yeah, it is Better Call Saul. Saul's name is in it, but it's also about these other characters and why they need to call Saul, I think. And so the whole thing kind of works. And if you love Mike Ehrmantraut, you got your Mike Ehrmantraut show. And isn't that wonderful? But anyway, all those things speak to the larger character arcs of all these characters, and you realize that when you get into Breaking Bad, that show, it really impressively, and I mean, Better Call Saul makes this really impressive. That show finishes off character arcs that you didn't realize you didn't have all the pieces to, and it's kind of hard to imagine all of that now without this show, which is the most impressive thing about it. But So real quick, I was gonna talk about my initial history and relationship with the show and why it took me so long to get to it. I watched the first season, maybe a season or two after it started. I don't know why it took me so long to get to it, because I love Breaking Bad. Well, I guess I'll say it's because I'm not in a hurry to see prequels. They almost never work, and even when they're okay, they almost never feel necessary or as engaging as the thing that came before. I go, why can't we just move forward? And I kind of had that with this, where I'm like, just make a Jesse Pinkman show. And this was, of course, well before we knew El Camino was going to happen. And well before, Gilligan and Gould knew that show was, that movie was going to happen, and I'm like, just go forward and give us that show. Like, I'd like to see what happens to Jesse Pinkman after that. I think part of the reason that they didn't go that way is because for them, this universe is about Albuquerque. Are they ever going to make a show? And we don't know that we'll ever see anything in this continuity again. Gilligan is working on another thing now. I think it's more of a genre thing. I think it's more in an X-Files vein. I forget exactly what the premise of that is, or if he's even. I don't think I think he's been pretty hush-hush about what exactly that show is. But anyway, I don't know that we'll ever see another show in this universe. But if we did, I almost guarantee you, I would almost bet you $100 that it's in Albuquerque and not someplace else, because that's where all the lore is. And so if you move forward, you have to take Jesse someplace else. So the only way to do a Jesse Pinkman thing was to show us what happens immediately after the events of the finale of Breaking Bad and have him back in town, which was kind of surprising. But again, you can't build on anything you've done already unless you keep it in Albuquerque. I mean, maybe you can. I could see an argument for it, but that seems to be the reason they haven't done that. So anyway, I watched the first season and was not blown away by it. I found it entertaining, and the writing was really good, but I felt like it, and I loved getting to see Michael McKean on an episode-to-episode basis, because I've always loved that actor. But it seemed a little slow and not in the same kind of Breaking Bad way, because while I'm saying that this show found its footing, and very quickly, by the way, and I bet now that I have the whole thing, those first couple episodes will watch better. I think the first 5.5 seasons will watch better now that I've got the end of the show. I'll say that right now, because this whole thing, once you get the ending, feels like it was all working toward that ending in the first place in a way that Breaking Bad didn't. And that might be part of the reason that some fans are saying that the show is better than Breaking Bad. I will say real quick, I can't quite go there, because I feel like it's a companion piece, and I feel like they not only complement but fully enrich each other. So like each of those shows feels now necessary to really appreciate the other show, but Breaking Bad for Better Call Saul more so than going the other direction, of course. Breaking Bad was a brilliant show all by itself. You didn't have to have Better Call Saul. Now that I have it, I'm glad I do. And that's a huge testament to how smart the retroactive writing is, in that it doesn't feel retroactive, and I'm buying nearly, if not every single detail and character choice and motivation as things that these characters would do before we know what is going to happen with them. And this is where the prequelitis problem rears its head so much with these things, where it's not about too often telling a story that fits in with the rest of what we have already, so much as it is not being creative enough to come up with a way to move forward. So you go backwards, but you also sort of move forward at the same time, which is irritating and unfair, and is insulting to an audience, where you have to retcon a bunch of things in order to make your prequel feel larger and more important than what you had before, because that's the only way to keep an audience, is the conventional wisdom from Hollywood, from executives. And so if you're going to do more Star Wars, you got to do bigger and better Star Wars. If you're going to do more Star Trek, you got to do bigger and better Star Trek, even though it's in the past. You can't come up with, you can't take the risk to tell the story that really would have happened then, and to make it character driven enough to really make it about a story more than making it about making an audience feel the same way they did when they watched your previous thing. Spediviscu, thank you for the super chat, and I'll get to that in just a minute. So I watched the first season and then was much more impressed as I got into the second. And I binged up through whatever was on Netflix at the time. I think it was through 3. I think I got up to... Okay, so I'm going to have to get into spoilers, so just I'll sign flip this. I'm feeling it, of course. I think this show is absolutely brilliant, and I think it's the best prequel I've ever seen. And a lot of people are saying that, of course. I'm just going to echo what other folks are saying. I don't mean to be repetitive and not be original, but when the consensus is right, it's right. It is great, and I'm going to talk in a little bit about how symbiotic the relationship is between these shows, and whether or not it would ever make sense to show a person Better Call Saul before you showed them Breaking Bad. But anyway, so I watched through third season, and I'm pretty sure this is where I stopped at, spoiler alert now, at Chuck's death. Jimmy's brother, who basically commits suicide because he is not going to be a lawyer anymore, and he doesn't know who he is. That's his whole identity, and his brother has taken that away from him so that Kim, his girlfriend and will later be wife, which by the way took me for a turn. I wasn't expecting that whole thing, so that she can further her career. And because there's been this tete-a-tete between them where both of them are manipulating each other, fighting each other behind the scenes, because Jimmy wants to be a legitimate lawyer but is cutting corners to do that and is trying to prove that he really can change, that he's not going to be slipping Jimmy forever, that he's not just a con man. And his brother is trying to stop him from being a lawyer, not just because he thinks he's a bad lawyer and it's bad for the world if guys like his brother are out there, but because he's jealous of Jimmy's success because he had to work so hard for it and Jimmy hasn't, but also because of the things that Jimmy is skilled at that Chuck is not skilled at. All of that is really sad and tragic, and that kind of pettiness is really believable and very genuine, and I feel like we've all known people with these kinds of family dynamics, and it really rang true. So yeah, I don't know why I just broke down that whole thing, except to say I found that all really fascinating and could not wait to get to season 4, but I didn't want to watch it on a week-to-week basis. I wanted to binge it when it all came out, and I wasn't subscribed to AMC, and I thought about doing that later, but they never had all the episodes up to watch it once. You had to wait till it went on Netflix, and Netflix kept taking like a year and a half after a season was done to get the whole season of the show up. So I had to wait a long time, and life happened, and I was dealing with other things and reviewing other things, and I never got back to it. And before I knew it, the show was almost done. And so when I think season 4 came out on Netflix, or maybe even it was even 5, I went, I'm going to go ahead and get back into the show. And I guess it had been long enough since I'd watched it that watching the first episode of season 4, I was lost. I just couldn't remember enough about what had happened in the show, and I didn't have time to go back and rewatch all of it. So, since I've been on break from live streaming anyway. By the way, I'm back on Monday for regular 5-day live streaming again. Join me that night if all things go according to plan for a superhero rewind on Power Rangers, the movie from 2017, and then the Captain Logan show comes back on Tuesday. Anyway, so quick plug for all of that. I will be back to regular live streaming, but I went ahead and finally got all of this binged while I've been on break, and I'll just say that, I was really impressed with the writing all the way through, but I kept finding myself going, I'm not feeling the same way I did while I was watching Breaking Bad, and that's the risk the show takes, is that in some ways, You just can't with a prequel, especially if it's focusing on a character that you're intimately familiar with or pretty familiar with. Obviously, we didn't know very much about Jimmy McGill, Saul Goodman's background, Gene Takovic's background, and you know that he's going to live, and you know some of the characters that he's involved with are going to live. And there are certain characters that are new and introduced that you go, okay, this person's going to either have to move out of Albuquerque or is going to have to die at some point during the show. So you can kind of start, putting up headstones for certain characters and go, I don't think he's going to make it out. Nacho's not going to make it because he's mentioned in the episode that introduces Saul, which is called Better Call Saul in Breaking Bad. And so, something's happened to him. He's probably not around anymore. Or again, he's moved or something. So, of course, I'm not superficial enough to make everything just about who lives or dies. If a character lives, there's no story to be told before we first met them. No, I don't actually think that, but there is so much suspense all the way through Breaking Bad because your main character is constantly in jeopardy, and he's constantly putting other people in jeopardy, and you never know when he's going to lose it or make a mistake that's going to get somebody killed. And so there's just this inherent tension all the way through that show, and this has a somewhat different vibe, even though the pacing is very much like Breaking Bad, and even though there are certainly places where I am feeling that kind of suspense, that kind of tension. And so I kept going, this is really impressive, again, in how it's fitting in the continuity, how I'm buying everything. I love the subtlety of the writing. I love all the character comparisons that I'm making all the way through between Saul and Walter. Right away or very early, it's pretty clear thematically what the mirror is supposed to be between these characters. Walter and Saul are two sides of the same coin, even though they weren't really arch nemeses. Thematically, it feels like they kind of are. Walter White's real arch nemesis is Hank Schrader, and Saul Goodman's real arch nemesis is, take your pick between a few characters, I guess, because Chuck for a bit, Lalo for a bit, et cetera, but thematically, it's Saul and it's Walter, because these are two guys who at first glance are the same, but are actually totally opposites. And I found that really interesting all the way through, and I might break that down a little bit later on. But beyond that, I kept going, if this show doesn't do anything in the future post Breaking Bad, I am a little bit any more than just checking in with the black and white stuff, because I wasn't sure entirely what the point of those scenes were, but I was hoping that it would turn into a sequel and a prequel simultaneously, and it's also the best example of that I've ever seen. This is not in betweenquel. It is a prequel, and it's not a sequel that takes place in the past either, like Star Trek 09 or something. It is a sequel and a prequel simultaneously, but what it really is a long con, which is awesome, because because Saul Goodman is a con man. So it's a show with another show wrapped in it that you have to have in order to get a full character arc of one character. So while Breaking Bad is the reason we're here in the first place, and this is a spin-off and a prequel to that show, for Better Call Saul, Breaking Bad, for his character arc, for that character study, Breaking Bad is one piece of this much larger whole, and you have to have all of Breaking Bad once you get to the end of this in order for Saul Goodman's character arc to be fully realized. And that's why the show is genius. That's why it ultimately works so well. And if you didn't have that, if for some reason the show ends with Jimmy McGill is full on Saul Goodman now, he's in his tacky office, and he's rich and all of that. The end. Good night, everybody. It would be still maybe the best prequel we've ever had, in that it's consistent, in that it's telling a real story, in that I'm invested in these characters. But what puts it over the top and makes it something really special is that Saul Goodman's character arc is not finished until after Breaking Bad. You have to have all of it. And his relationship with Kim Wexler is not, like, their arc together, that whole thing is not fully fulfilled and resolved until after Breaking Bad has happened. And so my point is, there's ultimately a genius reason for getting this now. And like, while I'm watching it, I keep having a little bit of like a why now thing. And I've always said that it's important to hook your reader right away, and to expect a reader who's not invested, who's not sucked in, especially from the beginning, is sometimes too big of an ask, especially for a series, whether we're talking about a series of novels or a series of films or television. You're asking a person to put in a lot of hours sticking with you and not really knowing if you're going to stick the landing, and especially in a world where so many TV shows have really good first and maybe okay second seasons, but then peter off after that because they drink their own Kool-Aid, or they just aren't they just don't have great ideas past that, where they're kind of spent from the beginning, where they can't, they had good ambitions and good ideas from the beginning, but they haven't been able to continue past that. It's a big ask now, right? And this show has an even more impressive ending than Breaking Bad. What was impressive about that ending was that it made sense, and that it seemed like more or less what would probably happen. Like, I bought it. And actions and consequences, and Walter White sticks it out to the very end. That is a show that is about change. It's about a character who, when that show starts, Vince Gilligan goes on record and says, "We are making a show that is the study of change. It's chemistry. It's about a chemistry teacher. It's the story of change, of a character who is evolving and becomes someone else throughout the course of it." Importantly, though, at some point, you can argue where it happens, Walter White is no longer Walter White, and he becomes Heisenberg. And when Walter is Heisenberg, he never looks back, and he has multiple opportunities for change all the way through the show, where he could turn himself in, he could apologize to his friends, he could explain to his wife, to everyone else around him, what to Hank Schrader, to Marie, to his son, what he's done, and how remorseful he is about it, and he could stop the whole enterprise. And he doesn't do that, because he turns into a selfish monster that is only about his ambition and feeling like the king of the world. That's why Walter White is so scary. He does everything he does under the pretense of trying to help his family and leave them something when he dies of cancer. But it's never about that, and he says that at the very end of the show. And by contrast, this show is about stagnation. It's about a man who may have always been this way. And I love that it's Walter White who, at the end of the show, himself, and the show is really good at bringing back guest stars for a good reason. And I have read that there were several people, including like Walter's son, and a few other characters that Gilligan and Gould wanted to bring back, that they didn't, because they couldn't find good they couldn't come up with good enough reasons with scenes that made sense to get into episodes, especially those last couple episodes. So if it didn't make sense to get somebody back in, they didn't do it, and they had so much storytelling integrity with that. But anyway, this is the story of a guy who actually does have a good heart in the first place. Now, don't get me wrong. You certainly get Saul Goodman to a place where he has embraced his inner villain, just like Walter White has. But the difference is, Walter is like actually changes and becomes that person, and can't and can't go back, or chooses not to go back. And the exact opposite thing happens with this. I'm going to pause for just a minute, and I need to take care of something. I'll be right back, and I'm just going to put a pin in this. Thanks for watching, and sorry I still haven't gotten to that super chat. I'll do that in just a couple minutes. I'll be right back, folks. Okay, sorry about that. But so I was talking about stagnation versus change. So Jimmy McGill is a man who has a superpower that is easier to use for evil than it is for good. And what do you do when you have a good heart, when you want to be legitimate in your profession, when you want people to take you seriously, and when you want to really accomplish something, but what you're good at is manipulating people, is long con chess games, is master manipulation in the background. What if you are brilliant at being a supervillain, but what you really want is to be a hero? Like what exactly do you do with that? And that's what this show is about. And so ultimately by Breaking Bad, Jimmy McGill has chosen to fully embrace the bad guy. But the reason I love the ending here so much, and why it feels like the whole show was writing to this, as opposed to Breaking Bad, where Gilligan freely admits he didn't know how that show ends. And I haven't listened to anybody, Gould or Gilligan, and Gould, I think, was more of the main showrunner on this show, even though, Gilligan writes and directs some episodes, and wrote the penultimate episode, and you can tell, man, that is very much a Gilligan kind of episode. It's the most Breaking Bad the show ever gets, I think. But those guys, by the end, I guess what I was going to say is, I can't tell how much of the ending of the show was planned, but with Breaking Bad, it was impressive that making it up, as they went along, it really comes together at the end in a way that a lot of people weren't sure if it could, and it's all a cohesive piece, and you buy it beginning, middle to end. It's a wonderful novel put on screen. This, it feels like it had to have always been the plan. And if it wasn't, it's even more impressive to me. Because, like I said, with Walter White, that is a story of change with a man who has every opportunity for change at the end and doesn't take it. That's kind of the irony of the whole thing, is that once he's made his transformation, he stays there. And this, again, is the opposite. And it's wonderful. It's still a tragic story, but it ends weirdly on as happy a note as it possibly could, where, like, I don't know that I've ever been as impressed with an ending of a series as I was with this. It made the whole thing worthwhile. And that's what I was talking about earlier, where, I spent the whole show going, I'm appreciating this. I'm glad I'm watching this. My mind is wandering a little bit here and there during some of the lengthy montages and some of the visual storytelling, where I'm like, this is like artistic and impressive, but I don't know if we really need to spend spend this long lingering on certain shots and things to tell the story we're telling. The whole thing feels worthwhile when you get to the end, when Saul, who was, as Walter White says, was always this way. You've got this nature-nurture question, and it's nature-nurture with both of them, certainly, but he's tried so hard to turn his life around, and ultimately just completely embraces Slip and Jimmy. And then he gets that opportunity at the end when he has not been able to change, and he changes, and it's wonderful, and like it made me tear up a little. I was really impressed with that narrative call, and I was heartbroken over, like, I was really invested in his relationship with Kim, because watching her go from legitimate lawyer who is really great at her job, and by the way, I'm really impressed with all the job stuff in the show, all the work stuff, where, like, I'm believing that all these actors are really good at their professions. I'm buying the professions. It all feels very credible, and I'm not a lawyer, so what do I know? But compared to some other legal dramas and courtroom dramas and things, it really feels like all of the I don't know, it really feels like all the details are right, and you've got a lot of downtime and a lot of people kind of sitting around being bored, waiting for things to happen. That makes it feel real, and you've got a lot of red tape and paperwork and the bureaucracy. That's the word I was looking for. That is sometimes absent for the sake of simplification with other shows. And so I bought all of that stuff, and she's, like, incredibly organized and independent and knows what she's doing and should be, like, running a firm herself, not just, like, her own private thing where it's just her, but, like, she should be the next Charles McGill. Like, she seems that good at what she does. And she's seduced by the dark side, and she's seduced by Jimmy, who has a good soul, but, like I said, is just too good at being a con man, and doesn't want to bring her down in the mud with him, but then has a hard time convincing himself that where he is the mud, because he's so good at it. So, like, it's really sad, it's really tragic with both of them, and I found myself rooting for them even as she's being transformed into something closer to him. And even as that starts to seem like a toxic relationship, where I'm like, I mean, I know, and maybe in some ways, knowing what happens later makes it worse, makes it more tragic, because they're not going to be together, and you're just waiting for the other shoe to drop. They're still together so much further into that show than I ever thought they would be. When you get the place after the insanity with I keep wanting to call him Laszlo, with Lalo, and the death of Hamlin, of Howard, and by the way, there's a guy, like, these guys, sorry, I'm so all over the place, these guys are so good at making you really dislike a character and then feel really sorry for them later. Howard reminds me a little bit of the guy that Skyler cheats on, Beneke, in Breaking Bad, where, like, he's irritating, he's kind of full of himself, and he's in denial about stuff, and, like, I don't like him, and I kind of want him to slip on the ground and hit his head, and then that happens, and then I, like, felt bad for him. And I have the same thing with Howard, where it's like, I mean, he's kind of an a-hole. He does not deserve what happens to him in this. It's really sad, the way they treat him, and it's nuts how good Jimmy gets at being cold and emotionless, and like, telling himself that he doesn't care about what happens to people. Like, does he feel bad about his brother's death, or doesn't he? He's able to act real cold about it. Ultimately, when you get to the end of the show, it seems like he does, but he's able to compartmentalize that so easily. That's part of his kind of scary superpower. And So I'm rooting for them. I want somehow, even though I know it's impossible because I've seen Breaking Bad, those two to be able to stay together and Jimmy to go more toward Kim's way of looking at things, at least originally, than his. And no, they become a toxic power couple. And she finally says, we are bad together for other people. We're poison, I think she says. And I think one of the reasons that I was so enamored with their relationship was, again, in paralleling it to Walter and Skyler. Because Walter eventually, once Skyler knows that he has broken bad and that he is running a drug empire, is basically his hostage, and even calls herself that at one point. I'm your hostage. And he kind of forces her to sort of be his partner, but it's never an equal partnership. He never trusts her enough to tell her what's going on, and of course that's dicey anyway, because you don't know what she's going to do, and if she doesn't go along with you, she can take you to the DA, to the DEA, which by the way is next door because that's your brother-in-law. I love these dramatic situations, but the problem is, from the very, very beginning, he is incredibly condescending to his wife, and he does not believe in her, and he does not trust her, and I don't know if he ever I think he loves her, or I think he at least thinks he does, but everything Walter White does is because he feels bad, not for any moral mistake he's made, not for any injustice he's done, but because he had an opportunity to get rich and he messed it up and he squandered it, and he blames everybody but himself for that. One of the best moments in the whole show, and I know I've been talking about the ending a lot, but it's such a good ending. Those last 3 episodes are dynamite, and I love the conversations in the finale, or is it the second to last episode? It's all blending together now, but I think it's right at the end, where you have Mike, and I haven't talked much about Mike yet, but you have Saul, Mike, and Walter in different scenes, 2 different scenes, talking about their regrets. And it's the perfect encapsulation of these characters' motivations and what's in their heart and how they think and feel about things. Where Walter, where the regrets that Saul and Mike have both speak to the fact that they are still human beings. Mike wishes he had never gotten on the take as a cop, that he'd never compromised himself. And ultimately, he's able to compromise himself all the way down to the point where he doesn't really have much of an ethical code anymore. And it's heartbreaking. And with Saul, it's, I wish I had never conned anybody, but that's what I'm good at, and it's my nature, and I don't know how to not do that. And it's kind of the scorpion metaphor, right? And then you get to Walter. And it's so consistent with Breaking Bad, with that series, where he says, I regret what happened with my former business partners, and that I pulled out before they were able to get rich off of my ideas. And you have to remember that he says this after all the insanity has gone down, and he has killed Mike, and he's gotten a child killed, and he's gotten Jesse Pinkman's girlfriend killed, and all those things. And none of that is what he is, what he feels bad about, what he regrets. And it's so hard not to just see. I'm doing it now. It's hard not to just break all this down and analyze it, because it's wonderful storytelling, and it is just so much fun to talk about, right? Saul Goodman, is he a good man? And you wait the whole show to know for sure. Like 30 minutes before he ultimately starts down a path of redemption. And I say starts down a path because it's not like he can make up for everything, but he saves Kim, and he does it through a con, which is what the best thing about it, I think, is that he finds a way to use his power for good ultimately at the end. Half an hour before that, he looks like he's turning into Walter White, where he's got a like what looks like a fiber wire, but he's got a wire that he's coming at Carol Burnett with. And here's the thing and Carol Burnett, by the way, is really good in this. It was nuts to see her in the show. And you get to the end, and I guess this kind of is just turning into a spoiler cast. But you get to like the last half hour of the show, and it looks like he's going to murder Carol Burnett. And then he doesn't end up doing that. He tries to go on the run, and we shoot it the same, or not the same way, but it feels a lot like when Walter is on the run toward the end of Breaking Bad, and he ultimately is able to, call the vacuum place and get relocated and get his name changed and everything. And Saul tries to do it again, and it doesn't work out. And by the way, it's also important to note that Saul could have avoided all of this if he just left well enough alone, but he couldn't help but do the con game again because of the thrill that it gets him, because he's good at it. And again, that's why Walter did everything he did, because he's good at it. The difference is the regard for life, or lack thereof, with each of these guys. So, Saul Goodman, he names himself that. And by the way, I was impressed that I was okay with this being worked into the show, because Gilligan in interviews had always said that Goodman's name is a play on "It's All Good Man." And that's ultimately the actual origin story for it. And it really works because of that question, and because he's trying to answer that question the whole time. Is he a good man? And ultimately, by the end, he proves that he at least has that in him. Even if he's made a lot of mistakes that he'd never be able to completely atone for, Walter at the end is not a good man. And I love that you're asking yourself that question through that whole show. And with Breaking Bad, it's pretty clear pretty early that you're looking at a supervillain. So Walter White, he's supposed to be the hero of the story, but it's an irony. He's actually not a white hat, he's a black hat, he's the bad guy. Saul Goodman, he's doing all these terrible things, but deep down wishes that he could be a good person, and by the end proves that maybe he is deep down. And one of the motifs that I loved the most through this, and it only comes up a few times, but I think it's really indicative of the themes of the show, and I wanted to make sure and bring it up. The monogram on the bag. Because there's this wonderful identity question through this whole thing. He keeps changing his identity, and he wants to be one thing, but he keeps proving to himself that he can't be any more than the sum of his parts. He's a con man, that's all he is. And he starts with his given name, Jimmy McGill, and McGill has this connotation of excellence and integrity and being above board in the law, being a good lawyer, proving that profession is not just for liars, with Chuck and with what he did with that name. And ultimately, Jimmy won't use that name because of what happens with Chuck, and he wants to distance himself from that after he gets disbarred for a year from the law and finally is able to come back after a lot of hurdles. And arguably shouldn't be allowed to practice law again, but is able to come back through loopholes and stuff. And he starts practicing as Saul Goodman. But Kim has given him a gift that she got made before she knew he was going to use that. And I love this. That's got his original initials, and it's JMM. And he makes up something in the moment where he's like, well, I'm going to carry around this bag, but I'm not going as Jimmy McGill anymore. So what do the initials stand for? And he says, justice matters most. And of course, he doesn't really believe that, or at least he's not operating that way. And then later, Lalo takes a look at the bag. And this is one of those things that, from a writing perspective, I'm really impressed with, because these guys are so good at not missing opportunities. I'm sure that those initials were not initially come up with because they could stand for either of these two things. But you're in the writing room and you're trying to come up with stuff, and you go, hey, wait a minute, what could these initials stand for? And we come up with opposite things that each represent a possible persona that Jimmy McGill could have in him. And it's his choice. And at the end of the day, the point is, it's his choice. He can be who he wants to be, whatever is in his nature or not. And Walter could be whatever he wants. Millions of opportunities for change. This is writing 101. Give your character an opportunity for change. And it's not just, what do we learn through change? This is a mistake that I hear beginning writers make all the time when they're talking about this. Your character needs a moment of change. No, needs an opportunity for change. Whether they take it or not is what's interesting beyond that they take it. You can tell a wonderfully character-driven story that is still about a three-dimensional character that is not stagnant, who makes a decision not to change. And both of these characters are doing that throughout, and at the very, very end, they have an opportunity, and one of them takes it and one of them doesn't. You see how Breaking Bad is a better show for this? It's wonderful. So anyway, justice matters most, and Lalo looks at the bag when he hires Jimmy to... And oh man, that's a rough episode when he's out in the desert with Mike. But when he hires him to go get his several $1 million for bail, and he goes and he says, no, it's not justice matters most, it's just make money. And that's what Saul Goodman's all about. And ultimately, why? What is he going to use the money for? He lives in, and I think that's the point of the mansion and everything, that he is just living super frivolously because he just wants to prove that he's worth something, and he's using the abilities he has because he has them and because he's good at it. And the money just represents that he's the best at what he does. And what he does isn't very nice. But anyway, I love the acronym thing. That's astounding. That's some really good writing. Justice matters most. Just make money. It's those two ideas against each other the whole show. And at the very end, it's not about the money. It's not about the jail time. It's just about doing what's right for his friend, for his ex-wife, for the person he cares most about in the world. And again, jumping around, sorry about that. But a thing I meant to say earlier with comparing Walter and Skyler to Jimmy and Kim is, Jimmy, by contrast to that relationship, respects her from the beginning. I love the way they operate as a couple. You almost have to keep reminding yourself that they have a romantic thing. Like, they're such good just partners in general, and they're not constantly like on top of each other and making out all the time. Like, anytime they actually get physically intimate, it's a big deal. Like, this might sound like a weird thing to say, but especially with a show with a guy like this who's so tacky and who's flamboyant and always knows like what, a sarcastic quip to throw out and all of that, he doesn't really, in some ways, he doesn't seem like an adult, right? But he's got this very adult relationship that you don't always see a lot on television. Just a couple of people like really truly respecting each other and acting like adults. And when you get to the place where he's not telling her everything and she can't have that, it's so less superficial than the way Walter White does it. And I'm not saying that that's not handled in a sophisticated way for that character in that show, because again, he's condescending. He's not even treating his wife like a person entirely. He puts her almost too much up on a pedestal, almost forgets that there's a human being there. And with Jimmy, he's it's, I've lost my train of thought, but it's a real like respectful relationship in the first place. He's treating her like a real equal, and actually, even more than that, wants to be her in a lot of ways. Let me go ahead and go to Super Chats now. I've been rambling a long time, and Wasn't gonna do that, but I've had too much to say. Spetty Viskew, 2 pound super chat. Would you be open to a Gus prequel? Honestly, I don't think so, because I'm not sure what else there would be left to say with that character, and maybe I could be proven wrong because I might have said that about some of the characters that we got a lot about in this show, but I was a little bit disappointed, honestly, and I haven't gone into very many criticisms yet. In fact, I said best thing, worst thing at the beginning of the show, and I haven't even done that because I just turned this into a spoiler cast right away because I guess I had a lot more to say than I thought I would. But, I was a little disappointed that we didn't get more, new character stuff for Gus. Like, I don't feel like I learned that much more about him here. It was kind of just confirming a lot of things we knew already and seeing where a lot of his pent-up anger comes from when you get into Breaking Bad. And Gus is my favorite character in Breaking Bad, so I enjoyed every morsel of screen time we got with Esposito in the show, and I'm glad that I'm glad he's here, and I'm glad he gets as much screen time as he does. But that is one of the things that feels like it's they're more fulfilling in the blanks than it is to finish a character arc. I mean, I guess technically it does do that, but, if you've seen Breaking Bad, you already know why he hates Hector, Salamanca. And we don't feel the need in the show, by the way, to thank God it never flashes back to things that you've already had flashbacks for. I really appreciate that. It always gives its audience credit. These shows, both together, are the best argument I can think of for never flash to a moment you've had already before a character makes a decision. Is there a place in these shows where you felt like you needed that? And it never happened, right? So knock it off. Things like Dark Knight Rises and stuff like that. Don't flash back to a moment. I'm with my character if you're writing it right. I don't need that. But anyway, Gus, yeah, so like I said, I found myself a little disappointed that we didn't sink our teeth more into Gus than we did, but then I don't know what else you do with him, really. So a prequel that's before he's got the restaurant, where you see him coming up with his brother and all of that, that would be, it would I would worry it would be, again, too much just filling in blanks and not telling a real story. And maybe there is a story to be told there, but after you've done all of this, as much of a masterpiece as these two things together are, I think somebody else before the show started called it that. I agree. After all of that, if you do a much more tiny, intimate character study that doesn't continue to build that lore, I'm not sure at this point how easy it would be to get real invested in it, unless you did a little anthology thing where it was an episode. It was 45 minutes or an hour. If you did it as a movie, maybe, but a whole show that's just that, I don't think I could get real excited about. Just if you had, and also the other thing I was going to say about that is, you almost have to hire a different actor at this point for him to play him that young for an entire show. I don't think you can keep going backwards now after we've done a prequel that takes place starting in 2002 that we didn't finish until 2021 or 22, whenever that finale aired. Yeah, I don't think you can keep going backwards at this point unless you start recasting everybody. And it's a suspension of disbelief thing. You have to just kind of be okay with watching actors that do physically look older than the characters they're playing now, and just think of it almost more like a stage thing where it's this actor is portraying this character, use your imagination, they're younger. So, you get a couple of characters in El Camino that have put on a little weight and don't look like they did right after Breaking Bad. Who cares? It's well written and it's well acted, and I can suspend my disbelief and get past that, whatever. Would be much harder to do that with an actor playing a character that is 25 or 30 years younger than he is. But it would be like if you had Walter White do a prequel where he's with his girlfriend coming up with brilliant scientific theories for a whole series. I don't really need that. Hey, real quick, let me mention a couple other things that I wasn't super keen on with the show, because, I mean, I am saying masterpiece on the whole with Breaking Bad. I don't know that it stands alone. I don't know that it's entirely that it's actually at all meant to stand alone. But I'll throw a couple of gripes out at you. I wish it was 5 seasons instead of 6, being a perfect mirror for Breaking Bad. Other side of the coin, both for the character and the series. I wish it was 1 season shorter, and I feel like it could have been. Like I said, there are places where my mind wanders a little bit, where I feel like scenes are long because that's how we make this show, and I never really felt like that with Breaking Bad. And so much of that with that show was about tension, and sometimes with this show, it's just not tense in the same way, and I feel like the pacing could have been not as decompressed, or the storytelling could have been not so decompressed. So that's a minor complaint. But once I have that ending, I find myself thinking maybe a lot of those scenes I'll feel better about the pacing once I know where it's all going. And that's just kind of the nature of the beast with a thing like this. So like I said earlier, it's taking a big risk in doing it that way. And I think it's totally fair to complain about that. But it also seems like one of the series like Breaking Bad that maybe requires at least one more viewing. I kind of expected to spend a little bit more time with Hector and getting more of, I don't know, just his personality and some time with him before he ends up in the chair. And I was a little bit surprised that as little was done with him as was. But again, maybe there's not much more to say with that character. He's not a super complex person, and he's really mean and completely unsympathetic, so maybe I don't want to spend any more time with that guy. I don't know, but I guess I was a little bit surprised that we didn't do any more with that than we did. But yeah, pacing and length is really my big complaint. Like, I do feel like some of this could have maybe been truncated down a little bit. And I had very small motivation questions here and there. The story, all just on one viewing, really seemed to track to me. All the con stuff was especially impressive. That, for the most part, anytime Saul has or Kim, other, because there are several characters, I guess, that are manipulating people through this show. Anytime somebody has this long chess game they're doing, I usually buy that working your way backwards, all the things that they planned actually worked the way they intended them to. The dominoes fell right. There are a couple places here and there where I'm like, well, if that character hadn't made the decision that you really hoped they would, I don't know what you would have done after that. But overall, it seems to track really well. But I had, again, little motivation questions, like with Francesca. Why does she stay with Saul Goodman, ultimately? She comes in, and I expected to get more screen time with her. But again, I can't complain about that kind of thing, and Huel, too, but I can't complain too much about that stuff, I guess, because we're not gimmicky with it either. We don't feel the need to develop this big supporting cast of major players that were minor in Breaking Bad to try to go off on their own stories and make them huge major players, and then you get to Breaking Bad, they don't have that much to do, because I've seen prequels do that kind of thing a lot too, and it's obnoxious. So I guess I do appreciate that, but those two characters I expected to see a little bit more than we did. Huel, I don't know if he gets any more screen time in this show than he does Breaking Bad. Maybe he does, but I don't know if he does. Francesca comes in to work for Jimmy and Kim together when they have their joint firm, but they're working separately, which is really interesting once you see where everything goes, that they try having this relationship where they're not combined because that's poisonous, as Kim, I think, starts to understand pretty early on, and Jimmy remains oblivious to. But she comes in to work for both of them, but really likes Kim, really likes her job. She's happy, she's kind of bubbly. When she comes back just to work for Saul, when he starts to put together his new permanent office that he'll have throughout Breaking Bad, she says, hey, this place is kind of a hellhole, and I don't like these. What happened to all the old people you were working with when you were doing elder law? I don't like this. I don't like the new clientele you're working with. I could just go back to the DMV. It's called something else. They make a joke out of that. I can't remember what it is, but she's like, I can just go back and work for the government. And then she doesn't do that. She just stays with him the whole time. Why? Like, there's nothing keeping her there, and she hates it. Like, how much is he paying her? Is that why she stays? I don't get it. I always got the sense in Breaking Bad that he maybe didn't have something over on her, but just for some reason that we're not told, she's got a vested interest in sticking with him. She's loyal to a fault, and also kind of hates him, so it doesn't really make sense that she's that loyal. I didn't really understand that. Okay, I'm at an hour. I'm going to knock out these super chats, and then I have one more big point I want to make, and I'll probably close out. Robert Wild, $2 super chat. What were your favorite characters introduced in Better Call Saul? Kim Wexler is right at the top. Oh boy, is she a wonderful foil for Skye, but also for Jesse Pinkman in a way, right? Like, she kind of is lots of different characters all rolled into one, if you're comparing it to Walter's situation and the way he broke bad, because a lot of characters in both of these shows break bad for different reasons, and I meant to mention this earlier. That's also kind of an interesting thing, right? The name of the shows, because when Better Call Saul started, I was like, well, that's a little cute and obvious. Like, Breaking Bad didn't have the character's name in the title. But this does, so I mean, maybe it's supposed to point to it being a very, very different thing, and then ultimately it is and it isn't, right? Walter White breaks bad and stays bad. He's a bad person. He's a bad seed. He's a supervillain. And so it's, I don't want to say exactly double entendre title, but there are different characters who break bad in the sense that they go against the law and they do illegal things as their livelihoods. And like Mike says, real early on, there are to the guy with the baseball card collection. My baseball cards. That guy's hilarious. Who buys the ridiculous Hummer? He says there are good criminals and there are bad legitimate people, cops, straight men, and I love that we see every permeation of that, and characters that start off as good people and become terrible, characters who maybe were always terrible, and characters who lead themselves to think or make the decision, I was always bad, who absolutely weren't. You get everything in between. So Breaking Bad isn't just a guy who goes against the law, who was on the straight and narrow all the way up until his 50th birthday. He breaks bad in that way. He breaks bad that he becomes a bad person, and Saul becomes Saul. You see a you see a physical transformation. You see a transformation in his attitude with the way he treats people as he goes from Jimmy McGill to Saul Goodman. But he is the same man all the way through, which is one of the things that's really interesting about it. The big irony, and it's about the people who not just him becoming Saul, but people who call on Saul to do things in the way he gets forced into the drug cartel life, becomes a friend of the cartel. I think the name of the show pays off really well at the end, where ultimately Kim doesn't actually call Saul. Like he comes up with a ruse to bring her there. And then he takes his licks and gets her, gets the law off her back. But like he kind of becomes her lawyer in a way at the end. And she should, should have called Saul. That's great. That's awesome. Anyway, sorry, Robert. Your question was favorite characters. So she's at the tippy top, and then I think, to be honest with you, the characters that I was most invested in were characters that I was already familiar with, because one of the things that makes it such a good prequel is how Mike is handled and the ways in which it is the Mike Ehrmantraut show. You've got all these mysteries about him in Breaking Bad, and how he went from being a cop to an enforcer for a drug kingpin, and why he's willing to kill people now who don't necessarily deserve it, and all of that. It's wonderfully tragic. Once again, it's really heartbreaking. I bought every piece of that. The story, the episode where you finally find out what happened to his son, is one of the best written episodes of television I think I've ever seen. That just hurt my feelings. But anyway, as far as other new characters, the guy with the baseball cards really cracked me up. I laughed every time he was on screen, so I guess I like that guy a lot. And I didn't think that I loved Nacho as a character, but the way he goes out is great. And his relationship with his father is really well written and well handled and really sad. So I guess by the end, I'm putting him on that list too. So I guess it's Kim and it's Ignacio, I guess. $10 super chat from the Recovery 716, which is not a name I recognize, but welcome. And sorry, I am answering this like half an hour after you left this super chat. I had an out-of-body experience. This is one of my favorite shows of all time. It's almost better than Breaking Bad, and in some ways it is better. The first scene with Kim and Lalo in the apartment was riveting. Agreed. Rhea Seehorn deserves an award. Yes, and I don't know... I'm sure this show won Emmys. I haven't really paid any attention to that. I hope some actors besides Odenkirk, and I mean, I hope Odenkirk too, but I hope some actors besides Odenkirk got nominated, including Mike, including, why can't I think of his name right now? It's gonna come to me eventually. Jonathan Banks. But yeah, let me take this opportunity to make the last big point I wanted to, because it's related to this recovery. So you say one of your favorite shows of all time, almost better than Breaking Bad, and in some ways it is better. When you get the whole thing together, it is two separate things that blend beautifully, right? For the mythology, for plot, let's just take plot away from character. I never like to do that. Character plus plot equals story. For plot, it's all one show now. There's a lot that we didn't know in Breaking Bad that this wonderfully informs, and believably so. So we now have the whole story of the drug cartel and what's really going on with the feud between the Santa Monicas and what's the name of the other family with Don Eladio, and all of that's where a lot of the suspense in the series it comes from, and why it feels genuine to keep a lot of the tone of Breaking Bad. That's all one narrative through. But you have two character studies that, once you have the whole thing together, again, believably, you need Breaking Bad in its entirety before Saul Goodman's story can finish, which is why this show happens when it happens. So I see them as wonderful companion pieces for each other. So I'm going to say Better Call Saul is a brilliant prequel, and probably the most brilliant prequel I personally have ever seen. I'm sure there's stuff that I don't know about. I never saw the old Battlestar prequel Caprica. I haven't seen, and nobody talks this up as a great show or anything, but I've never seen Fear the Walking Dead. There's other stuff, but I think this is the best prequel ever. Is it the best TV show? Is it better than Breaking Bad? The fact that it requires Breaking Bad makes it really hard to call it that. So, at some point, it kind of just gets down to a technical thing, right? Not even semantics. It's just technical. Breaking Bad works, as I said earlier, and I don't mean to repeat myself too much, works perfectly on its own. And now that I have this, I feel like it's made even better. It's enriched by this material, and so anything that makes what I thought was the best show on television, that I've ever seen anyway, that much better, is really impressive. But it's hard to call it the better show. But the writing is just as good. The character work is just as solid. It is, I think, its subtlety in symbolism and thematic ideas is unparalleled. That part of it, I am more impressed with it than Breaking Bad. Chuck's aversion to electricity, the psychosomatic thing, his thinking that he's allergic to electricity is kind of genius. He's allergic to power. He wants to be the most above board lawyer who always crosses his T's and dots his I's, does everything completely by the book and legally, and he's allergic to power. When his brother is just naturally easily able to amass power. I love that. That is genius. Did you catch in the last episode where they're in the courtroom and Jimmy is bearing his soul and finally telling the truth? And when he starts to talk about Chuck, we cut to the exit sign and we hear it crackling with electricity. It's really, really smart about that stuff. So, I was preoccupied the entire show until the very end, going, do we finally have the prequel that makes sense to watch before you have the original thing that it's a prequel to? Because I've always said, and I've never seen a prequel that really functions this way, but I've always said that it's just about intent and making it clear what your intention as a writer is with a thing like this. So a prequel doesn't have to completely stand alone to be a good story, because it might be ultimately a story told out of sequence, right? Non-linear storytelling. And there's a real good case to be made to do that in this universe, because Breaking Bad already had a lot of non-linear storytelling, and Better Call Saul by itself as a show has a lot of non-linear storytelling. So is the idea that this is basically just the way Breaking Bad told stories, where it would give you scenes that you don't know what you're looking at yet and then eventually catch up to them, and making Breaking Bad that for this show, where it wants to be a thing that you could watch from the beginning, because there is a linear story being told about the drug empire. And now that you have this, it is a little bit weird starting at Breaking Bad, getting in the middle of that and watching to the end, and then going, okay, now I'm going to go back and watch the beginning of that story. But there are a lot of elements from Breaking Bad that you would be missing if you watched Better Call Saul, and wouldn't necessarily fully understand some character motivations. Bear with me, because this is going to take some explanation. So, you never have in Better Call Saul, like I said earlier, very much about Gus's brother. It's kind of brought up in passing. The show seems to suspect that you're already familiar with that, or if it's not thinking that, the idea is just rigidly, we already gave you that scene in Breaking Bad, so whenever you happen to watch it, it's in there. So we're not going to force the exposition into a scene, because our characters are talking like real people, and they're not going to say things that's just for the audience. So then the question is, and I'm just using this as an example, if you watch all the way through Better Call Saul and you don't pick up on exactly what happened with Don Eladio and with Hector Salamanca, and with regards to Gus's brother, and why he wants revenge and all of that, are you going to be able to keep everything straight and stay invested also, and care enough that when you get to Breaking Bad, that finally plays as a big reveal for all of that? Or is the idea supposed to be you really are supposed to watch Breaking Bad and its nonlinear storytelling, where you get a whole character arc for Walter White, the ultimate supervillain, and then you get the whole character arc for uh, Saul Goodman, and then now that you have Breaking Bad, you'll appreciate the rest of that character arc. I think that's what's intended. I don't think you're supposed to go back and watch Better Call Saul without that. However, there are also, well, and real quick, I'll also throw this example out. It would, if you watch Better Call Saul by itself, you would, I think, and I think this would be unintentional. It would be a long time before you got a payoff for what exactly they're doing with the laundry. And if you already know Better Call Saul, you know why that's being built. And it never occurred to me that would be such a hard job. I kind of ultimately enjoyed having that, where I'm like, oh yeah, that really would be a huge undertaking. And it takes as long as it does for Gus to take over production of the drug empire to right before Walter White comes into the picture, because it's so hard to get that stupid hole built. I really liked all that, but I found myself going, oh, it's not until like season 4 that you'd even fully appreciate, I think, why that hole is there. But if you watch Breaking Bad, you have that, and then things like, if you watch it in linear order, would things like the way the camera pans in on the restaurant when we first see Los Pollos Hermanos, would that play as the nonlinear thing like with Breaking Bad, where you'd make a big deal out of a symbol that you don't know what it means yet, and then at some point you'll understand it, like the stuffed animal that's got the eye that's popped out in the swimming pool. We show that episodes and episodes before we get the airplane and everything. We see what exactly happened with that. Would scenes like that play that way, or would it feel like, okay, this is supposed to be really important, but I don't know what it means yet because I didn't watch the other show? Like, I can't unsee what I've seen. I already saw Breaking Bad, so I don't know how it would watch if I was a new viewer watching it without that. And you might say, well, Cap, I mean, what would be the point in even watching this show first? You have Breaking Bad already, but you know that there are people who are obsessed with this idea with looking at things chronologically and giving creators of things too much credit and going, oh, well, Star Wars must start at episode 1, right? And aren't thinking about the fact that you are expected to already know that stuff, whether the prequel is done well or not. That the idea is you watch them in the order they came out at, and then they're aimed at an audience that's already familiar with certain things. Better Call Saul works on both levels at different points. It's crazy to think that there are moments in Better Call Saul where I wish I didn't know Breaking Bad, and that's why I'm spending so much time on this, where I found myself going, this would be really suspenseful if I didn't know who lives or who dies, if I didn't know what exactly happens with Saul Goodman later, with Mike later, etc., etc. But I also don't know if I would have stayed invested all the way through, because one of the things that kept me there was all of the character and thematic parallels that I'm making between Saul and Walter from watching Breaking Bad. So, overall, I actually think there is kind of a way to watch Better Call Saul first, and you might appreciate Breaking Bad as well or better. Maybe. But the only way to do it is to break up a character arc, and that's what I don't like about this. I don't think you can watch all of Better Call Saul and then watch Breaking Bad. I don't think that makes sense. And the reason is because there's too much in those last 3 episodes. Well, first of all, the last 3 episodes are a straight-up sequel to Breaking Bad. So even though you have sequel scenes with the black and white stuff, and kind of interesting, that choice to turn that on its head, and black and white means future, not past now. And I love that they took the risk to just do basically 3 whole episodes in black and white, and they said, who cares? We're going to be consistent with the formatting that we've chose. That's great. And it, I don't know, it adds this again, kind of noirish quality to it, when the storytelling gets more that way. But anyway, first of all, it is a sequel to Breaking Bad, certainly. But again, we're looking at some nonlinear storytelling, so the idea that you could finish your prequel show that you would start watching first with stuff that happens after the next show is not necessarily crazy ask, except it gives away everything with Breaking Bad. So Breaking Bad has already given away stuff that makes Better Call Saul watch less intense, maybe, and some of that is just there's no way around it, of course, but I don't think you want to know exactly what happened to Walter and to Hank, etc., before you've seen Breaking Bad. I do think you could watch all of Better Call Saul up until Kim and through Kim leaves, and we jump to the future, and then go watch Breaking Bad, and then come back and watch and then watch El Camino, and then come back and watch the last 3 episodes, which are a sequel to Breaking Bad. But you've broken up Saul Goodman's character arc if you do that. On the other hand, you have and you haven't, because you'd also see the rest of it in linear order. You guys tell me what you think about this, because I'm thinking maybe the next time I watch through these, that's how I'll do it. Watch Better Call Saul up to the last 3 episodes. Watch Breaking Bad, watch El Camino, and then watch the last 3 episodes of this show. I think that might be the way to do it. I also think watching Breaking Bad and then watching the show is perfectly fine and is probably the more ideal way to do it. But that might actually work. And I never suggest this with prequels. Anyway, once again, I want to thank you so much for your super chat. The Recovery 716. Okay, got a few more of these super chats, and that was my big last point. That was my big spiel. So I'll finish these super chats and then get going. Thanks for sticking with me, watching live or after the fact. Appreciate you guys. Lewis Woolsey, a £5 super chat. Thank you. Do you think Walter would have won a showdown with Lalo like he did with Gus? That's a really interesting question. I want to say Lalo would have been too formidable for Walter White. I want to say that Walter got really lucky about who was alive and who was dead. I think Walter got lucky. No, I'm going to say Lalo absolutely wins that, and Walter's just really super lucky that he's dead already, and that Hector is in a wheelchair, because arguably the place where he almost doesn't make it. That's a terrible sentence. The place where it's most surprising that he gets out alive in Breaking Bad, again, arguably, is Tuco out on the farm. I mean, he's got close calls with Gus and stuff too, certainly, and if it's hand to hand, if it's like if he walks up with a gun like Kim tried to, yeah, he's dead. That's it. I'm sorry. I guess Kim did that with Gus, but yeah, like if he like just goes right in and tries to kill him, and doesn't do it with any kind of ingenuity like he does with Hector, with Gus, like I think he would lose. And even if he's trying to use ricin or a bomb or something, it's still, I think, less likely that he beats Lalo. But I don't know. That's a really good question. One of the things, real quick, that was really fun about Gus was seeing that he's got this whole underground catacomb thing going on under his house. That was pretty great. I love seeing the curtain peel back there, and that we just didn't need that before. Does Gus Fring live alone? I don't know why. I had the sense in Breaking Bad that maybe he was married, or do we even get a wife or something? I can't remember. For some reason, I thought he was married. But then watching this, I was like, oh, I must have been wrong about that. I guess he lives by himself. Yeah, Lalo's crazy. I mean, that's the thing that he's really got up on Gus, is that Gus is certainly more than intimidating. He is certainly ruthless and willing to do whatever it is he needs to do, but he's also really patient, which is his best and worst attribute. Another super chat from Recovery 716. Nacho was a great character, and his ending was beautiful. It was, and he felt to me like in some ways a foil for Jesse Pinkman. My favorite episode was Chicanery, and I don't speak episode title with the show yet. I don't know it well enough. When Chuck lost his stuff in the courtroom. Yeah, and easily the best performance, right, from Michael McKean. That was rough. And when that moment where, you know where it's going to go. This is where, by the way, I really am feeling the tension. The bit where he's had a cell phone battery or whatever it is on him the whole time, and then it messes up his credibility, and he just completely loses it because his life for himself, for all intents and purposes, is over. And that's really sad after years of, like, hiding away in his house, not having electricity on, but still holding on to the chance that one day he'll overcome this illness that turns out to all be in his head and go back to work. Again, another character who does really awful, petty, heinous things. Chuck, at the end of the day, is not a good guy. Like, he is for his profession, but he's not as a person for his brother, and yet I really end up sympathizing with him to some degree, caring about him. And that's another thing that I wanted to bring up somewhere. I'm glad thanks for reminding me. I'm glad I thought of this, going back to Chuck. I mentioned nature nurture earlier. There's the question of enabling with a character like Saul Goodman, like Jimmy McGill, where sort of a chicken and the egg thing. Like, does he end up becoming the horrible, like, poster child for commercial lawyering like he does because his family, like Chuck, didn't believe in him and kept telling him that he is going to always be this way because he's always been this way, and that's why he goes that way. Like, is that the reason that is it ultimately that, or is it that he really just naturally can't help himself? Like, the people that are worried about him and worried about the rest of the world and what he'll do to it, if they just would make, even if they don't believe it, if they would make him think that they believe in him, he can do it, he can be a better person, maybe he would have overcome that. Or, I guess what I'm saying is Saul Goodman to some degree Chuck's fault? Is a question that I had throughout. The MVD, thank you, Jeffrey, appreciate you, man. Robert Wild, $2, as opposed to the DMV. I couldn't think of it. Robert Wild, $2 super chat. My favorite episode is Bagman with Mike in the Desert. Yeah, that's way up there. That'd be in my top 5 as well. I think that is all the super chats. If I missed one, somebody please let me know. I'm going to read a couple pre-written comments here just real quick before I leave. Noah O, my favorite character is the talking toilet. Oh, yeah, I remember that. I forgot about that. Robert says this is the most snubbed show in Emmy history. Nicholas DK, no Emmys, which is a huge snub. That's preposterous. Why? Like, is it just because it's a spinoff thing, and so the Emmys didn't pay attention to it? That must just be a commercial thing? I don't know. Joel Sunx, this is my favorite show, period. Joel Sunx, does this show even have bad characters? No, I don't think so. I bought everybody. Batman kicks ass. Creator Peter Gould says, for the show, they asked the question, what does becoming Saul Goodman solve? I think Jimmy calls on Saul as a defense mechanism, which I like for the show title. That's a good read, too. I hadn't thought of that. Good call. Philip Kelton, 65 Mexican pesos. Why do we ask so much nature versus nurture? Both are true. It's never one thing or another. Well, I think that's what's interesting about it is it isn't that it's, I mean, we simplify it by asking the question, certainly, but yes, you're right. It's which of those things trumps the other. You know, it's the same thing in to some degree maybe as free will versus predestination, where and that's really related to nature nurture, but where there are some things that are statistically very likely to happen, and then the question is, do we have the ability to go against that, or can you always tell? At some mix of both, absolutely. But I do think it remains, and of course we've been asking the nature nurture question, telling that story since the dawn of time, since antiquity, and I think it's because it's universal, and we never have the answer to which one wins out because, as you say, it's a bit of both. And so I get why you might say, well, it's obvious that one doesn't win over the other, so why are we still talking about it? It's because of the human insatiable desire to control our fate, to know exactly what drives us so that we can be whoever we want to be. It's that really frustrating thing about being a human being and why we keep mining that truth out of stories about it. I think Robert Wilde just proof that voters don't actually watch all the shows that get nominated. I think so, because but I would think just based on performances alone, you'd have to nominate this show. Robert Wilde, because the end of the show spoils what happens to Hank, I'd say you should watch Breaking Bad first for newcomers. Yeah, and also some other things that it has to spoil toward the end. Joel Sunnix, did I miss something with? Oh, I didn't know that. Okay, as many times as I've seen that show, I never picked up on that, or I'd forgotten about it. Because now that you say that, that's starting to ring a bell. But okay, so Los Pollos Hermanos, they were not actually brothers. They were lovers, and he's he's homosexual. I forgot all about that. So yes, of course he doesn't have a wife because he's homosexual. Okay, well thank you guys for reminding me about that, because now that you say it, it's coming back to me, but I forgot all about that. Okay. Philip Kelton, don't you think we keep ourselves from growing up, from not moving on? Well, yes, I mean that's somewhat human condition as well. Bright Burns, what about Saul as a person? Does he ever come across as a scumbag? Well, yes, of course. He's a scumbag a lot, because, again, that's what he's good at, and it gets him ahead in life, and he has a difficult time not doing that, even though deep down he would love to not be that person. One of the other arguments for a newcomer watching Better Call Saul first, and again, I'm hesitating because I don't know if I'm actually really advocating for that, but I was suggesting a way that you could maybe do that, and where this show, I guess there's a part of me that wishes that you could somehow, like, wipe your brain of everything you know with Breaking Bad when you watch this show, so that some scenes would be more suspenseful, not knowing where things are going. But if you watch Better Call Saul first, the characters from the beginning are more likable. Because I know people, including my wife, that can't get into Breaking Bad because they just don't like anybody. And I get that. I'm sympathetic toward that. But I find the character study so interesting that it's not even about giving it a pass. It's the difference between characters being dictionary definition sympathetic versus being somebody you would want to go sit down and have a beer with. Walter White is fascinating. He's not a good guy from the beginning. And Skylar White is kind of awful from the beginning, and Hank's kind of obnoxious from the beginning, but these feel like real people, and Jesse I'm able to latch onto as at least a more likable person, but there wasn't enough of him for my wife. Like, she liked him too, but I showed her the first 2 or 3 episodes, and she was like, I can't do this show, and she'll never watch it now, because she's like, I just don't like any of these people, and for me, that's not a prerequisite to enjoy a show. Liking a character in like a friend sense, somebody I would want to pal around with, go out and drink with, versus a character that I like in that they're interesting. And I like Walter White as a villain, who is the protagonist of his own story. It's what an anti-hero actually is. But anyway. Bob Garland, in Breaking Bad, we hear Gus mention he has older children, teenagers, haven't been home on a Friday in years. Was hoping to get more of that detail and learn more about them at home. Oh, yeah, interesting. Robert Wild in Cap's defense, they are called the Chicken Brothers, but of course he couldn't come out and start a business like that in those days, which is a great detail. Like that's the reason he would call his business that. Brightburn's Walter White is the man who should have been Lex Luthor in a better written Batman vs Superman film. Yeah, and that's the actor that everybody goes to for that. And that's, I think, the reason that I latched on to Breaking Bad so hard when I first started watching it. I was real late to the game. I did get to watch the last season as it aired, but I didn't discover it until like 4 was on, so I binged it and then got to watch the last season. But yeah, I was enjoying it because it felt like I was watching a show about a Lex Luthor type who becomes that and is self-made in the way that traditionally comic book Lex Luthor is, or at least the businessman tycoon Lex Luthor as opposed to the mad scientist one. I'm going to go ahead and get going. Thanks a lot for watching, everybody. I hope you enjoyed the review, and I will be back real soon with lots more videos here on Geekvolution. Like I said, I'm coming back a lot for regular live shows starting on Monday, and I'm glad I went ahead and sat down and did this. I wasn't even sure if I was going to, because I was like, I've only seen it once, and I don't know if I know it well enough to really talk about it. Maybe I'll just do like a half-hour sign flip thing, and that's what I was going to do, and then I got really, really into it and couldn't help but do a little bit of the analysis anyway. So thanks for watching, guys. Really appreciate you. Slipmaker says Gus is lying about the children to connect to Walt. All the family stuff is gone when he has Jesse over for dinner later. I always wondered why that was. Thank you for that explanation. That's probably right. Anyway, I'm going to get going. Thanks for watching, everybody, and I'll see you again real soon. Leave your comments if you're watching after the fact. Tell me what you thought of this show, and if you're with me that it is brilliant and as good as Breaking Bad and kind of a great symbiotic thing, because I can't put it above Breaking Bad for that reason, but I think it's right there. They're the same show, and they're not the same show, and that's unprecedented. That's never been done before. I love that. Anyway, I'm going to get going. Thanks a lot, folks, for watching, and I'll see you again soon.